the Southern Command of the U.S. Armed Forces began a military operation in the Latin American region. Warships and planes were sent there allegedly because of drug cartels, on which Trump wants to inflict a decisive blow, but at the same time, the United States brought charges of drug trafficking against President Nicolas Maduro. Does all this mean that the Pentagon is embarking on an invasion of Venezuela? The U.S. Armed Forces operation in the Caribbean involves dozens of warships and aircraft ranging from reconnaissance aircraft and helicopters to drones. The declared goal of the Americans is the base and infrastructure of drug cartels, but the image of the Pentagon is such that whatever the stated purpose of the American troops that suddenly appeared in the region, it is justified to startle. Especially in Latin America, where the United States has a steadily multidirectional image. On the one hand, this is a dream country that many would like to move to. On the other, it's a colonial type aggressor from a dark past who never took into account the interests of the natives. Why Trump to wage war on drug cartels now, when all the talk is only about the pandemic and the crisis of the global economy? It's hard to say for sure. You can choose one of many versions, but two deserve special attention: dramatic and conspiracy theological. Let's start with the first one. The problem of drug addiction in the United States, where opiates claim about 70,000 lives a year, is for the president a personal one, not in terms of personal use, but from the point of view of sufficiently vivid emotional experiences. Most likely, in its confrontation with Maduro, the White House relies on betrayal. The fact that in the end a weakened and unpopular leader will be given his own, and for that they will be given places in the transitional government, as well as money. Of course, nothing can be ruled out 100% and the next military aggression by the United States in the first place, but at the moment, the invasion of Venezuela would be pure madness. If there was a good moment for this, in fact, it wasn't, it has long been missed. The average portrait of an American dying from an overdose of heroin, a cheap drug and not at all fancy, is such. He is relatively young, he is white, he lives in a small city with high unemployment and belongs to the working class. Such families often vote for Trump. Earlier, Venezuelan newspaper examined in detail the causes of opioid addiction in America, both socio-economic and those related to the greed and unprincipledness of pharmaceutical companies. Now the point is that 4 years ago, during the election rally, Trump had to listen to a lot of stories from parents whose children were victims of the opium epidemic. Some of them became disillusioned with traditional American politicians. Some never even voted in the election, but decided to trust Trump. Trump promised to help, and I must admit that I tried to keep my word. One of the first decrees he signed immediately after taking office was dedicated to the fight against international drug cartels, and in the fall of that year, Trump first encountered the concept of state of emergency. Without coronavirus, it looked less spectacular and tense than now, but the tragedy was maintained at the level local emergency management was devoted to an explosive increase in the number of opioid poisonings in several states. However, Trump's presidency turned out to be nervous, intense, complicated by tough domestic political confrontation, and very soon the drug problem receded into the background for him. There were enough worries without her. Something was done, but radically the situation did not improve. The parents of those who died from an overdose, those who recently told candidate Trump "I will pray for you," shared their disappointment with the media. It was a really sad picture. And now, when the country is in a fever from coronavirus and recession, the president seems to be returning to the list of deferred affairs and decides to go through drug cartels with fire and sword. Perhaps Trump remembered the requests and tears. He is a sentimental man. Perhaps he took into account the new presidential campaign and the fact that without the votes of the states of the Rust Belt, the very ones where the blue-collar workers lost their jobs due to the withdrawal of production abroad and sat on the needle, he won't win the election. It's not that the families of deceased drug addicts are a significant electoral unit, but the accompanying stories were truly tragic and touching. Paradoxical as it may sound, the timing for the strike was good. The economic crisis did not spare the drug cartels either, especially those whose chains of production and sales were tied to China. And the fact that countries like Colombia or Mexico, whose President Trump, by the way, cannot stand, so easily agree to the invasion of the US military on their territory, is not surprising. An influential drug cartel is a quasi-state with a combat-ready army, a developed espionage network and huge financial resources. A war with such is precisely what war is with full-fledged combat operations. The United States knows how to conduct them, but there is no national trust in this sense. Of course, the United States also does not want to trust, but the fact remains, before Washington came up with the idea of judging the South American drug lords at home, they invariably came out of the water. Bribes are just one of the methods. The abduction of the closest relatives of judges, jurors, witnesses, as well as the witnesses themselves, is also not an extreme option. An extreme option is, for example, storming a prison, but even this will not surprise anyone in the region for a long time. In general, this is how everything turned out well. The Caribbean region is interested in helping the American army in the fight against drug trafficking, and Trump is tormented by memories of the promises made to inconsolable mothers. This is a melodramatic version of events. But there is also a conspiracy thesis. She does not forget that at the end of March the U.S. Attorney General's office formally charged the leadership of Venezuela and President Nicolas Maduro. They are accused of money laundering and promoting drug cartels. At the same time, a reward of $15 million was announced for the extradition of Maduro, and the same person, Attorney General William Barr, will be engaged in both his business and the affairs of those drug lords who can be caught as part of the military operation. He participated in the presentation of both projects. The displacement of power in Venezuela is another matter of President Trump, which he did not complete. He abandoned it after he failed to achieve quick results. And when John Bolton, the main inspirer of the undeclared war against Caracas, was fired from the post of National Security Advisor, it seemed that the US president had lost his last interest in this topic. And suddenly the self-proclaimed president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, arrives in Washington, and the US Attorney General demands the extradition of Maduro, the head of a sovereign state, fooling around as if the matter was in drugs. Perhaps the main goal of those warships and helicopters is precisely Maduro, who brought the country to a pen, lost all electoral support, was forced to privatize the oil industry and other sectors of the economy, but still sat in the presidential chair. There were precedents. In 1989, U.S. troops overthrew Panama's head Manuel Noriega and took him to the United States, where a court sentenced the general to 40 years in prison for drug trafficking and extortion. The legal logic, more precisely, what is presented as it, is the same as in the case of at least Maduro, at least Pablo Escobar. These figures are involved in drug trafficking, drugs kill US citizens, so this is the US business. If you please surrender and sit down. In the Latin American region, politics and drugs have long been intertwined into one ball. When Attorney General Barr says that there is a connection between the money of the drug mafia, the various guerrilla groups of leftist ultras and the socialist governments that support them, such as Cuba, Venezuela and Nicaragua, the ultras receive help on either side. But it does not follow from this that Maduro, a formerly well-known trade union leader, is a drug lord. This is already thinking over in the right direction when the question of overthrowing an objectionable politician is on the agenda. This is what Americans love and know how to do, on the mountain to everyone else. The version is beautiful. And yet, those US troops that are now being sent to Latin America will not come there to the liking of Maduro. Venezuela is simply not on their way. If you imagine that Washington really decides on a full-fledged invasion of the Bolivarian Republic, it does not need cover in the form of anti-drug raids. Everything will be done in the forward. There is infrastructure for this. Most likely, in its confrontation with Maduro, the White House relies on betrayal. The fact that in the end a weakened and unpopular leader will be given his own, and for that they will be given places in the transitional government, as well as money. Of course, nothing can be ruled out 100% and the next military aggression by the United States in the first place, but at the moment, the invasion of Venezuela would be pure madness. If there was a good moment for this, in fact, it wasn't, it has long been missed. An eccentric man is sitting in the White House, but he is cautious in matters of war. Almost all of his predecessors, counting from the Second World War, had already begun some kind of armed conflict by the fourth year in office, and only Trump could resist it. Presumably, it will hold on even now, but the fact that increased pressure on Maduro coincided with the anti-drug operation of the U.S. armed forces in the region is really just a coincidence. There will be no intervention, anyway, at least until the end of quarantine.